Peter Obi, the man many see as the hope of a new Nigeria, now stands accused of turning his back on his own people. But why did he really refuse to sponsor the protest for Nnamdi Kanu's release? Was it fear? Strategy? Or something deeper tied to the power corridors of Aso Rock? Today, we uncover the untold political chess game, where President Tinubu watches closely, and every move could reshape Nigeria's destiny. The rumor began quietly, whispered in the corners of cafes and social media pages. Then, suddenly, it roared into the national conversation. Across Nigeria's digital landscape, a movement was being revived, #Free Nnamdi Kanu Now, a protest meant to demand the immediate release of the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu. It was not the first time Nigerians had heard the cry. For years, the agitation had simmered, sometimes peaceful, sometimes fiery. But this time, the call came with a new force. The youth were restless, the southeast was tense, and the courts seemed endlessly patient in their silence. At the center of the debate stood one name that stirred hope and expectation: Peter Gregory Obi. The man from Anambra who had risen to national prominence through humility, competence, and a reputation for prudence. To many, he represented what Nigerian leadership could be: disciplined, sincere, compassionate. And because of that, many believed that if anyone could lend moral weight to Kanu's cause, it was him. The question spread like harmattan fire: would Peter Obi sponsor the protest? Would he stand publicly with the agitators demanding Kanu's release? The answer would come, not through a shout, but through a quiet refusal. To understand Obi's decision, one must first revisit the storm that is Nnamdi Kanu. Kanu is more than a man. To some, he is a symbol of defiance, the voice of the voiceless, the dream of an unfinished nation. To others, he is a divider, a man whose methods have stirred suspicion and fear. As leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, Kanu championed a secessionist movement that called for the rebirth of Biafra, a dream buried in the ashes of Nigeria's civil war decades ago. He founded a radio station, Radio Biafra, and with words both passionate and provocative, he ignited millions of hearts across the southeast. But the Nigerian government saw danger in that fire. Kanu was arrested, charged with treasonable offenses, and locked in the maze of Nigeria's judicial system. His detention, prolonged and uncertain, became a rallying cry for activists and sympathizers. Now, under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration, the question of his release remains a test of national unity and political will. And so, when plans for a nationwide protest began to emerge, led by activists like Omoyele Sowore, with renewed energy from frustrated citizens, many turned to Peter Obi. His voice carried credibility, especially among the youth. If he spoke, people would listen. If he sponsored, the protest would gain legitimacy. But Obi knew what such a decision could unleash. Pressure mounted from all sides. Supporters, critics, and observers waited for Obi to take a stand. In the southeast, some community leaders argued that silence was betrayal. Social media influencers accused him of being too cautious, too diplomatic, too afraid to risk his political standing. If you truly believe in justice, they wrote online, why not fund the protest that calls for Kanu's freedom? But Obi remained measured. He had already expressed his view: there was no need to arrest Nnamdi Kanu in the first place. That statement alone made headlines. It was bold, but carefully worded. It signaled empathy without incitement. He praised the activists for their passion but stopped short of committing money or organizational support. He believed in lawful, constitutional processes, in the power of dialogue, not the volatility of the streets. Yet, many did not see caution, they saw cowardice. To them, Obi's decision was disappointing. To Obi, it was strategic, and deeply personal. He knew the Nigerian state. He understood its reaction to dissent. He remembered what had happened in the past: the End SARS protests, the broken glass, the lost lives, the curfews that silenced a generation. Sponsoring a protest in a climate of suspicion and tension could easily become a spark in a field of dry grass. And Peter Obi had no intention of setting the nation on fire. In the corridors of power, President Bola Tinubu watched events unfold with a calculating eye. The protest for Kanu's release, though not yet materialized, carried potential for unrest. Intelligence reports warned that agitators could infiltrate, that extremists might hijack it, that regional divisions could deepen. Tinubu, known for his political shrewdness, understood both optics and order. A protest led or sponsored by a national figure like Obi would change the equation. It would no longer be a fringe agitation, it would become a movement. And that, the presidency could not allow. Behind closed doors, security chiefs convened. Legal teams drafted court applications. Before long, the federal government quietly obtained a court order restraining activists from staging protests near sensitive zones, the presidential villa, the National Assembly, embassies. Tinubu's government justified the move as an act of precaution, not repression. The presidency's message was clear. No one is above the law. Justice must follow due process, not mob action. In truth, the administration saw the protest not just as a call for justice but as a test of its authority. And so, as the state prepared its defenses, Peter Obi's decision to stay out of sponsorship may have saved him from the storm that was gathering. There is a burden that comes with being seen as moral. Peter Obi carries that burden daily. He is not a revolutionary, he is a reformer. His politics are not built on confrontation but persuasion, prudence, and patience. To his followers, that makes him honest. To his critics, that makes him weak. But Obi's guiding principle has always been clear: change should be achieved through lawful and institutional means, not chaos. He believes that governance must heal the land, not tear it apart. In private conversations, insiders say Obi asked one haunting question. If I sponsor this protest, and a single life is lost, will the justice I seek still be justice? It was a question few activists wanted to consider. For Obi, politics is not about spectacle but responsibility. He knows that in a country like Nigeria, where protests often turn violent and law enforcement is heavy-handed, leadership is not measured by who shouts the loudest, but by who preserves life and hope. So, while he sympathized with Kanu's plight, he chose restraint. He would advocate through the courts, through dialogue, through statements that challenge conscience, but not through street mobilization that might spiral out of control. It was not fear. It was foresight. The days grew tense as the protest date approached. Posters appeared online. Plans were made in secret channels. And all the while, rumors swirled that Peter Obi would eventually lend his hand, perhaps quietly, perhaps through emissaries. But the support never came. Instead, Obi issued another careful statement, supporting the idea of peaceful advocacy, but refusing to endorse any confrontation with the state. He was walking a tightrope between principle and perception. Tinubu's government took notice. Officials praised Obi's maturity, subtly contrasting him with reckless agitators. Some even believed that Obi's restraint was an unspoken act of patriotism. Others saw in it a kind of silent negotiation, a gesture that preserved his political future and avoided unnecessary enmity with the ruling powers. Yet, among the people, the debate raged. Had Obi betrayed his region? Or had he saved his country? In marketplaces and radio shows, in group chats and newspaper columns, Nigerians argued, not about Kanu or Tinubu, but about Obi's choice. It was no longer a question of politics, but of conscience. The court still debated Nnamdi Kanu's fate. The southeast still simmered with frustration. And Peter Obi? He continued to speak, of reform, of fairness, of national healing. He urged government to follow the law, to build trust, to release those unjustly held, to open doors for dialogue. President Tinubu, meanwhile, pressed on with his agenda, balancing political interests, regional tensions, and economic crises. Both men represented two sides of Nigeria's dilemma, one governing from power, the other leading from principle. In refusing to sponsor the protest, Peter Obi had drawn a quiet line in the sand. He chose not to be the politician who fanned the flames, but the one who prayed for rain. He chose not to march in anger, but to stand in reason. He chose not to become another headline, but to preserve his voice for a larger purpose. History will decide whether that choice was cowardice or courage. But for now, his silence speaks volumes. The story of Nnamdi Kanu, Peter Obi, and Bola Tinubu is more than politics, it is a mirror of a nation's struggle to define its soul. And so, as the dust of protest settles and the echoes fade into tomorrow, one truth remains. The fight for justice continues, not always on the streets, but in the hearts and choices of those who still believe Nigeria can be better.